Peace of mind is something everybody strives to achieve, but unfortunately some never do. I'm Charles Renton with my review of Dark Side of the Ring, Breaking the Cycle, The Graham Dynasty. There is no easy way to talk about this episode, folks. Gut-wrenching, gut-punching, every type of infliction on the gut, the mind, the body, the soul. Shout out to Nicole Gossett / Graham, her grandfather, her father, her brother. Goodness. Oh, jeez. The fact that she is determined to keep living her life. She's not going to let it keep her down, even though it obviously would haunt her. It's never the answer, folks. I'm not downgrading. I'm not downplaying. I'm not knocking anyone. When everybody gets in such a deep, dark place, sometimes it's impossible to pull yourself out of it. It just is. That's just how it is. Regardless of whether it's all in your head, whether it's addiction, whatever it is, mental illness. I am going to put the National Suicide Hotline number in the description. It is never the answer. Help is out there. It doesn't just affect the life of the person who takes their own life. It spreads around to everybody in the inner circle and everybody that knew them, and just everybody's left asking, what if? This was tough. This was a tough episode. I had to pause it multiple times and take a break because the Graham family dynasty, as far as Eddie and Mike, and then Dr. Jerry Graham and the various other Grahams in the as far as gimmick Grahams, it's just amazing the influence that the Graham family had for decades in wrestling, the 50s all the way through the 80s and 90s. Great talking heads on this episode. So influential, not just in Florida, but nationwide. Eddie was so well respected by the NWA promoters, by Vince Sr., by Vince Jr. Both Eddie and Mike lost their lives the same way. Eddie's father and brother, that was talked about briefly. Mike's son, Kevin Sullivan, was quoted as saying the apple didn't fall far from the tree. Championship Wrestling from Florida, the legacy. I mean, it was great to see this whole footage. It was. There were some cool moments on this episode, but just the overlying, just tragic, dark cloud over the Graham family. Cornette talked about the history. He's great on pieces like this because he's wrestling historian, studied all this stuff, collecting all that. Student of the game, as many would say, about various people that have studied up on this. Nicole, she was great. Mike's daughter, just talk about this. Just she knew her stuff as far as growing up in wrestling, but also just she loves wrestling, but also knows it is ultimately one of the things that, while it kept her family going, kept her grandfather going, kept her father going, it also was one of the things that probably led to some of the issues that they had. I mean, let's be perfectly honest. I'm not blaming wrestling. I'm just saying that, you get so ingrained in something that when it's taken away from you, what else do you do? She remembers wrestlers sleeping on their couch, remembers being scared of Andre the Giant. Makes sense for a kid to be scared of Andre the Giant, or at least a little freaked out seeing a giant 7-foot, something individual. You're sleeping on the couch, or but I'm sure Andre was great with kids. Eddie Graham, he was the man in Florida. In the ring, behind the scenes, as talked about a little more later in the episode. Kevin Sullivan talks about Eddie. And Sullivan, I do knock Sullivan at times, justifiably so. But he was great here because he did, he meant a lot to Florida. He meant a lot to Florida before Eddie passed away, after Eddie passed away. Dottie Curtis, the wife, or the widow rather, of Don Curtis. I'm shocked she's still alive. I mean, I'm glad she is, because she was able to provide some great insight on this, Grand family friend. And that was great. She was a revelation on this. That was great to hear from her. They've really mostly knocked it out of the park with the talking heads so far. Dr. Jerry Graham footage. And it's just great that some of this footage survived from the 50s, and all this is just great. Just great to see that. Yeah, it's grainy, but guess what? You're still getting to fucking see this footage that seemed to be lost to time. And Eddie was wrestling as Rip Rogers in Texas, not Rip Rogers, a trainer, or the guy that Hawk tossed onto somebody in, I believe the, what was it? It was the Battle Bowl 1993 pay-per-view, I think is what it was. It was that, and it might have been Stark. Yeah, it was somewhere in late '93. That's the best thing that Rip Rogers ever did as far as a cable broadcast or a pay-per-view broadcast. Nevertheless, Eddie became Jerry Graham's brother, and in 1958, 57, 58, they were making huge money in Madison Square Garden for Vince Sr. And Vince Sr. obviously appreciated Dr. Jerry Graham. They were making, according to Cornette, about $100K a year or close to it, which would be about $1 million. Jerry was a drinker. Stories been told about Dr. Jerry Graham. I almost wish they could have told a few more stories, but they wanted to focus more on Eddie and Mike, which made sense. But they made the most out of the time that they devoted to Jerry Graham. Jerry Graham would light his cigars with $100 bills. Gee, I wonder if that led to any money issues he had later. He was a drinker. He had mental illness. He had a lot of stuff going on. And 2 years later, Eddie was like, I can't take this anymore. And even Vince Sr. was like, he can't keep bringing Jerry Graham in, as influential and as much of a draw as Jerry Graham was. Vince Jr. loved Dr. Jerry Graham as far as a personality. You can see that based on how he has presented his wrestling for 40 fucking years. Eddie says, that's it. I'm going to move to Florida. And also, I did like how they recreated the not the story, the actual thing that happened where Jerry Graham wanted his mother to survive a hospital stay. She didn't, so he went and got her. He had weapons with him and got her body and said, I have to bury her. Yeah, he was nuts, and I mean that in the nicest way possible, but boy, what a story. What a story. And his life did not end well. Not end well at all. Eddie, after moving to Florida, wrestled, bought into the territory, saw that it was going to be a viable territory, was smart, had relationships with the armories, various other buildings, local politicians, all these people. And B. Brian Blair talked about his time in Florida starting in 1977. Eddie, well respected by Vince Jr. and Vince Sr. by the NWA. I believe Eddie was an NWA president twice, if I recall correctly from this episode. Yeah. Eddie, then we start to talk about the bad stuff with Eddie. He did subscribe to the old wrestling promoter mentality. You get beat up by a mark in a bar or whatever, you're fired. Bill Watts did that in Mid-South. And then we see brief footage of the Bob Roop training, which, yeah, that's famous. That's been going around on YouTube, where he would torture people and then tortured somebody when they ran off. Was like, no, I can't do this. No! And he was tough. He would just basically say, you need to, it's like, you break somebody's bones. I mean, Hiro Matsuda breaking Hogan's ankle. Hiro Matsuda would train people in Florida. Well respected. But, Hogan came back and he did what he did. That had been talked about on the Florida Tales from the Territories episode. And then told Kevin Sullivan, hey, you got this local guy or whatever, you need to make him bleed or you're not going to have a job. And Kevin Sullivan did that. He wasn't proud of it. Brian Blair said he did stuff that he wasn't proud of. And, of course, then Kevin Sullivan says, making a guy bleed, probably the worst thing I ever did. Just ignore the whole thing about abusing Nancy that was never actually touched on. Let's just ignore that. The worst thing you ever did. So anyway, Eddie, he loved big time characters. He also loved realism. The main events would always have blood, would always be wild. There would be technical classics underneath. He would layer the cards, and they would be big deals. Miami, Tampa, various armories, stuff like that. It was great to see this old footage. And he was a drinker. Eddie was. He was a little tough on Mike. We did hear 2010 footage from Mike, and we even got to see a little bit of it. Eddie, being a little bit of a tough individual. Mike was a good worker. He blended in more with the guys. He wasn't trying to be just a promoter's son that wanted to put himself on top. He wasn't the over-the-top personality that his dad was, but he could. He could work with just about anybody. And Mike wasn't a bad worker. You can even take a look at his stuff in his later run when he was in WCW and he was near 40 and he was about to retire. He was he was good. He was good. He was a good technical worker. Mike did bleed a lot because that's one thing Eddie wanted him to do. And he also would drink like Eddie did. Dusty's face turn basically helped launch Florida. It was 74, I believe, Pax on Nan. And Eddie had various, charities. He worked with the Boys and Girls Club. He worked with various people. Unfortunately, he was torn between two women. He would drink, had bad business deals, as talked about on Tales from the Territories. Not going to get too much into it here. Even got to the point when he was drinking, when he would find that he was out driving and he found bottles in a field and would drink the dregs from the bottle. That was quoted from Dottie Curtis. He couldn't stop. He struggled with life outside the ring because suddenly he wasn't recognized. I mean, because he retired, he was 50, 51, something like that. He finally retired. And then Nicole was around, they were around for his birthday party, 55, or it's like, your birthday, what'd you get? 55 years. That's what I got. He was done. Eddie was done. He also had the bad business deals and the real estate stuff, and he had gotten into business with some people that probably weren't the best and everything, and he was losing money, and also the territories being swallowed up, all that. That's talked about in a little bit. Super Bowl Sunday, 1985. Eddie takes his own life. And right there, everything went to shit, basically, with Florida. Yeah, they had the NWA Championship Wrestling from Florida, Battle of the Belts. The problem, and it was like 1 in 85, 2 in 86. And pretty much, I think the third one in 86 still had a decent crowd. Like, I think it had about 7,000 to 8,000 people. I reviewed them, but sorry, a lot of stuff I reviewed. But still, Florida was not doing all that. It wasn't doing all that well. Eddie was the one to keep it alive. It's not that Mike didn't have a business mind. It's not that Mike didn't know what he was doing. He did know what he was doing. He learned from his dad. But Gordon Solie announcing that he's passing, you can hear the pain in his voice. You can hear it. Because Gordon Solie, well respected as one of, if not the greatest wrestling commentators of all time. There was somebody, I don't remember who it was, but one of his family members said that this guy came up to him and he was blind, but his dad helped him see wrestling. And that right there speaks a lot and speaks highly to Gordon Solie. Fun fact, Gordon Solie was supposed to be part of the Heroes of Wrestling commentary team, but I believe suffered some form of, something that would develop into throat cancer, and unfortunately would end up passing away. And family members were left to wonder why. Again, it's never the answer. There's no blame going around, but just Florida basically crashed. WWE helped swallow up the towns from the territories. Dusty leaving and going to Crockett was a big problem because he took the people. You can't really blame Dusty, though, because he had done everything he needed to do and could do, and then some in Florida. Should he have taken the entire territory or some of the roster, that's another story for another day, but he took people he trusted. Same with Eddie, taking people that he trusted and taking them to Florida. Wrestling just feeds on itself. And Mike took over, all that stuff happened. They had Freebirds feud with Mike over Eddie's passing. That didn't click. It wasn't that, the wrestlers were doing it in bad taste. The fans just didn't buy into it. So then Mike goes to WCW. They kind of skip over the fact that Crockett purchased Florida. Mike wanted to help the younger guys. I think he was out of the ring by 92, I think. I could be wrong. It might have been 93, but he had a backstage office job, and he had until the mid-90s, the later 90s. He got out of wrestling, raced boats with his son, and he had 2 driver's licenses. Unfortunately, he would drink, and then these various things happened, just stuff would pile up. And then his son Steven took his life. And found by Nicole, and Mike even said to her, it's a good thing you found him because otherwise you'd be burying us both. And that right there probably would just be enough to just say, nope, I'm not watching any more of this program, or, oh, nope, I can't keep going on with life. If you tell your own kid that, and I don't think I don't think he was doing it to be mean. That's just how he felt. But he lost his dad, lost his son, and Mike blamed himself for both. I must have been a shitty son and a shitty father. Woo! We're getting dark here, folks. We're getting dark. He called Kevin Sullivan, told him he loved him. And then Nicole was telling a story. She had a daughter and said, this ends with Steve, and this can't keep happening. Unfortunately, Mike took his own life. Less than 2 years after his son. Mike's wife got home from visiting friends and heard the fucking shot. Nicole's all slept. Her and her daughter. I'm not discounting the daughter at all. But yeah, 4 generations. Eddie's father and brother, and then Eddie, and then Mike, and Steven. Just so many family issues and all this stuff, and then Nicole's determined to break the cycle. I did like the montage, or the collage rather, of all the championship wrestling from Florida memories. That was good. That got me. That got me because, she was really broken up about that. Not that the other stuff didn't get me, but yeah, this was tough. This was tough to talk about. What do you guys think? What do you guys think of the episode? By the way, next week, Doink the Clown. Oh boy, that's gonna... Whew. About Matt Bourne, read up on Matt Bourne. You'll see I'll have some things to say about that, but oh, goodness me. Terrible. Just terrible. Absolutely terrible. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, subscribe. Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Retland. Rest in peace, Cram family. Rest in peace. See you soon.